Okay. We come now to a continuation of our theme in the book of Daniel, to understand and recognise together the relationship of this great prophecy to our present day, because the prophecy was written for God's people right down to the very end of time as a guide and director, enabling us to understand just where to put our feet and which pathway to walk. We came in the study of the great image yesterday to the point where Daniel had explained that the four great world empires should succeed each other, and then at the end of time there had come a partition between strong and weak elements of power. And then verse 44 speaks of the coming of a permanent kingdom, an everlasting empire built upon other principles than those of the world. Verse 44 rather than 45, and in the days of these kings the God of heaven shall set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Inasmuch as you saw that the stone was cut out of the mount without hands, and it had broken in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. The dream is certain and the interpretation is sure. Now comes the truly incredible aspect of the whole presentation, because King Nebuchadnezzar was so convinced by what he heard that day that he threw himself upon the floor and actually worshipped the messenger of God in the person of Daniel. Now, we read the story here in the Bible. It takes us but a few minutes to cover these few verses. We think about the position of the king, so convinced that Babylon's ways were right, that Babylon was the answer to all problems, that there was nothing she couldn't handle, and that she was in fact a permanent and everlasting world empire. In just a few short hours, the king is persuaded that all those positions are utterly false, that Babylon will pass away, and that only God's kingdom shall become the enduring, everlasting empire for all time. Now, certainly the whole presentation must have been a very dramatic, a very power-filled presentation of the king to be persuaded so quickly and so conclusively as he was. Let's read now the verses that tell about his change of mind. Verse 46 and 47 and 48. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face, prostrate before Daniel, and commanded that they should present an offering and incense to him. The king answered Daniel and said, "Truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, since you could reveal the secret." Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts, and he made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief administrator over all the wise men of Babylon. Now, the testimony of the king was supported by his actions. When he made Daniel to be the administrator in his kingdom, the chief administrator, obviously, of course, this was a declaration upon his part that Daniel's ways, and therefore God's ways, were the right ways to go and were the ways to be trusted. As we look back over 2,500 years of human history, remember that God's revelation to Daniel was made at a time when Israel was at its lowest ebb, when things were very black and very discouraging and very disheartening. And yet with such confidence and power, God presented this message to King Nebuchadnezzar. And over 2,500 years, we've seen every detail fulfilled with great accuracy and great certainty right down to the very present moment. This being so, what must we expect about what is left of the prophecy yet to be fulfilled? It too will come to pass. As Daniel said, the dream is certain and the interpretation thereof is sure. Let's compare ourselves with King Nebuchadnezzar. Certainly, of course, we're not great world potentates, wielding enormous power, commanding huge armies and ruling over the entire world. In this respect, of course, there is no comparison. But in respect to the fact as to where our trust is placed, there could be a very definite comparison today. As we think about our way of life, we're preoccupied with amassing material wealth and strength, making sure our house is paid off eventually, making sure we have a fine car, a good permanent job. And our attention is fixed upon these things as the all-important goal at the present time. Now, when we have this attitude, this disposition of interest now, what difference is there between ourselves and Nebuchadnezzar's faith in his material greatness? There is none. And like Nebuchadnezzar, we need to be convinced, as he was, that there is no real future in materialism. There is a present, but not a future. Because even as God frankly admitted to King Nebuchadnezzar, he said, you are a king of kings, you do rule over the entire world, you possess it all, and your policies and your procedures have certainly brought you these things so far as this life is concerned. Let's not then argue about the fact that human procedures and plans do bring material security so far as the present is concerned. There's no question about that. But what about the future? What about eternity? What about the times when all these earthly things shall pass away, become dust as the prophecy predicts, and another kingdom altogether takes its place? And to be a part of this other kingdom, this enduring permanent kingdom, means that like Daniel today, we must become a part of its procedures, a part of its way, so that its ways become our ways and we walk with God as Daniel did. Think about it as we move on now to understand more of the mighty revelations of God through the prophet. Now we pass over to the 7th chapter, which opens up before us the next great prophetic outline. There are great lessons, of course, to be learned in the intervening chapters. Nebuchadnezzar's building the great golden image in the plains of Dura as a denial of his previous witness and a reversion back to his belief in Babylon's supremacy. The victory again gained by God's people who preferred to die rather than to yield. The lion's den story, Nebuchadnezzar's madness. But let's pass over all those because of our shortness of time and come down to the 7th chapter of the book of Daniel, and we'll cover this as quickly as we possibly can because chapter 8 is the really important chapter so far as our theme this week is concerned. Now this time it was not Nebuchadnezzar, but it was Daniel who had the dream himself. Chapter 7, verse 1. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon it while on his bed. And he wrote down the dream and telling the main facts. And now this time he sees, first of all, an ocean, a sea which is stirred up by the winds of strife which were blowing upon this sea. Go to Revelation chapter 17 for a moment, verse 15, to learn what seas represent in Bible prophecy. Revelation chapter 17 and verse 15. We'll there learn that seas are a symbol of people, waters symbolise nations, kindreds, tongues and so on. Here are the exact words as they come to us from the scriptures. Verse 15 of chapter 17. And he said to me, the waters which you saw where the prostitute sits are peoples, multitudes, nations and tongues. Now these four great beasts back in Daniel chapter 7 that he saw arising out of a troubled sea are four great world empires. In fact, they're again Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece and Rome, as we shall shortly recognise in our study presentation. And they arose out of the strife and turmoil of those days, wars and rumours of wars, struggles and battles and conflicts and controversies. They did not rise peacefully, but in a warlike situation. And we have before us today in our charts a picture of these great powers, the first of which was a lion which had eagle's wings, as we see in this artist's representation. Let's read now the scripture in regard to this. Daniel chapter 7 and verse 3. And four great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I watched till his wings were plucked off and was lifted up from the earth and made on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. Now, just as the head of God was succeeded by three more great world empires, so the first beast, the lion, is succeeded by three more great beasts in their turn. The next one being the bear, as pictured here, with 3 ribs in his mouth. We'll read about him in verse 5. And suddenly another beast, a second like a bear. It was raised up on one side and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And they said thus to us, Arise, devour much flesh. Now, the next beast to rise was a leopard with 4 heads and 4 wings, as pictured in this artist's representation. Verse 6, After this I looked, and there was another like a leopard, which had on its head, on its back, 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. So far we have a lion, a bear, and a leopard. But now comes the most fearsome beast of all, the great, what I shall call a dragon, a beast which we read about in verse 7. After this I saw in the night visions, behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Let's pick up the picture now of this next great and terrible beast that appeared on the scene. There is a great red dragon in this case, and he has 10 horns growing out of his head, as you can see in this particular picture. Now verse 8, I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up amongst them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And then this horn were eyes like the eyes of man, and a mouth speaking pompous words or great things. Now that then is the picture of the rising of these 4 beasts in their turn. And the little horn which rooted up 3 of the first horns becomes the focal point of interest in this great prophetic outline. And we'll concentrate mainly on the identification of this little horn power and follow through from there as to what he means, what he was, and what he aimed to do. The next event in the drama was the judgment scene. Verse 9, I watched till thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days was seated. His garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, its wheels a burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. 1,000 ministered to him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. On the board now we'll begin to lay out a diagram which will cover the ages of time and give us a clear view of the succession of events which took place in fulfillment of this prophecy. So let this line across the board be the passing of time. We start off first of all with the lion, which is followed by the bear, which is followed by the leopard. Then comes the dragon. Then we find that 10 horns are next in the succession, followed by the fall of 3, number 3, 4. And we'll move on from there to the judgment scene, which takes place after the little horn has come to power. Let's put the little horn next in the line of succession. And then comes I just put the word court, being a shorter word than judgment. And finally we'll find we come right down to the end of the drama with the actual advent of Jesus Christ as the concluding act in the drama. And let me stress again the point that the second coming of Christ must be preceded by the cleansing of the sanctuary, and the cleansing of the sanctuary must be preceded by the stopping of that stream of sin which is flowing into it from the confessing believers day by day. So we're moving now toward our focal point, the cleansing of the sanctuary and the second coming of Jesus Christ. Let's come back to verse 11 now of Daniel chapter 7. I watched then because of the sound of the pompous word which the horn was speaking. I watched till the beast was slain and his body destroyed and given to the burning flame. As for the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season of time. Now verse 13 talks about the coming of Jesus Christ to his Father and then in turn to this earth. I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Then to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom the one that shall not be destroyed. Now this brings us to the end of the actual vision itself, all the details being given in regard to these various animals and the role which they played. Now Daniel became concerned to learn the interpretation of the symbols in the vision. Who was the lion, the bear, the leopard, the dragon? What were the 10 horns and the little horn? And what would they each do so far as God's work and God's people were concerned? And so verse 16 or 15 and 16 shows that Daniel was concerned to learn the interpretation of these things. And so it says in verse 15, I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit within my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. I came near to one of those who stood by and asked him the truth of all this, so he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. Those great beasts which are four kings which shall arise out of the earth. That's very clear language. The Bible tells us itself what those 4 great beasts represent. Now think for a moment of the appropriateness of the symbol. These 4 beasts, the lion, the bear, the leopard and the dragon, are all fierce, savage predators. Wild animals, devourers, destroyers, flesh-eating carnivorous animals. And when you think of the behaviour of great conquering nations, are they not the same predators, destroyers, flesh-eaters? Certainly. When we come to liken Jesus Christ to an animal, what animal is chosen? A lamb, right? A harmless, lovable little lamb. How different the picture is, of course, between the two. So then, the lion was a kingdom, the bear a kingdom, the leopard a kingdom, and the dragon a kingdom. Who they were, of course, we will learn as we move on in just a moment. Now, Daniel shows but scant interest in the first 3. The lion, the bear, and the leopard, as we shall now read. And, of course, there's very good reason for that, and we shall likewise learn. Now verse 18 says, but the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. In these 2 verses, the entire prophecy is enclosed in the briefest possible terms. First of all, it says, there should arise 4 great world-conquering powers, but the saints shall possess the kingdom forever and forever. Once again, of course, we're living, or Daniel was living in a time when it appeared as if the saints of God would never possess the kingdom. They would never ever come into eternal life. But here is the assurance that from, again, the darkest of all times, that they would eventually possess the kingdom forever and ever. Having made this simple summary to comfort the prophet, more details are now given as we move on. Verse 19, then I wish to know the truth about the 4th beast, which was different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, with his teeth of iron and his nails of bronze, which devoured, broke in pieces, and trampled the residue with its feet, and about the 10 horns which were on his head, and about the other horn which came up, before which 3 fell, namely that horn which had eyes, and a mouth which spoke pompous words, whose appearance was greater than his fellows. So Daniel said, I want to know about the 4th beast, the great red dragon, and the 10 horns, and the little horn which rose after those 10 came to power. Those are the areas I wish to be clarified on, said the prophet. And verse 23 introduces this explanation. Thus he said, the 4th beast shall be the 4th kingdom on earth. Now, just as Daniel showed no interest in the 1st, 2nd and 3rd beast, so the angel did not refer to them in his explanation. He began with the 4th by saying, the 4th beast shall be the 4th kingdom upon the earth. Now, why was Daniel not interested in the first 3? Because he already knew about them from Daniel 2. Now, if the dragon was the fourth kingdom, it must have been none other, of course, than the mighty kingdom of Rome. And the leopard was Medo-Persia, the bear was Grecia, and the lion, of course, was Babylon. Now, we today, likewise, are not particularly interested in Babylon, Greece. I got that wrong, I'm sorry. Yes, I got it wrong, I'll correct that. It should be Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece and Rome. So that's the worst of trying to figure history out backwards. Now, just as Daniel showed but scant interest in Babylon, Medo-Persia and Greece, so likewise today, those are simply nations which have come upon the scene of action and passed away forever. They are now just ruins of their former selves. Babylon doesn't even have a population today, although Greece and Rome certainly do. Well, I believe Greece and Medo-Persia certainly do. Now, with Daniel, our main interest is on the fourth beast, and more particularly on the little horn power which rose out of that particular beast. That's where the main interest lies. And we'll move right on to find out the details in regard to that part. And so then we come to, again to verse 23. I read that already, I'm sorry. Verse 24. The 10 horns are 10 kings who shall arise from this kingdom. Let's stop right there for the moment. The 10 horns are 10 kings which shall arise from this kingdom. Now, whereas a beast represents a kingdom as an entity, as something standing by itself, the 10 horns symbolise smaller divisions coming out of an existing kingdom. So these 10 horns, as the scripture plainly says, are 10 kings who shall arise from this kingdom, namely, of course, the Roman Empire. Now, starting around the year 476 AD and running down to about 533 AD, the Roman Empire began to suffer invasions from the north and from the east by people whom we call the barbarians. They were Huns, Ostrogoths, Visigoths, Suevi, Franks, Burgundians, Vandals and so on. And history shows there are exactly 10 divisions of the Roman Empire between the year 476 AD and 533 AD. Exactly, of course, as foretold in the prophecy. But now we come to the little horn, verse 24 still, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the first ones and shall subdue 3 kings. Then comes a long list of details about this little horn power, which we'll jot down on the board in just a moment. But first of all, let's identify the history of that day briefly and quickly. When the Huns came down from the north, they occupied the city of Rome, and the Roman Emperor had to move his capital from Rome to the east to a place called, in those days, Byzantium. It became known as Constantinople later, and today is called Istanbul, the capital of Turkey. And so Justinian, the then Roman Emperor, moved from Rome to the east. Now, at the same time, the Vandals were giving the so-called Christian people a very bad time in North Africa. They were persecuting them very severely and threatened to wipe out the so-called Christian population, which in fact was the Roman Catholic population in that part of the world. So, to change history, Justinian sent a navy and army down to North Africa under the direction of Belisarius, who was the Roman general and admiral of that time. I'd like you to remember that we read that the little horn plucked up 3 of the first horns by the roots. And when you take a horn out by the root, what's its future history? It has none, has it? It has none. Any of you who've ever worked on cattle stations, if you have, will know that when a cow is dehorned, that's one thing. But to take the horn out by the roots, of course, it never ever has a chance of growing again. So we must expect to find that 3 of the original powers then do in fact disappear from history forever. And so totally did Belisarius wipe out the Vandals, that they did in fact disappear from history, and the first horn had fallen in the year 533 AD. In the meantime, I think the Ostrogoths were, was the Heruli occupying Rome, and the Ostrogoths came down and wiped them out, so horn number 2 had been destroyed. And then Belisarius sailed across the Mediterranean Sea up to Rome with his army and wiped out the Ostrogoths, and 3 horns had fallen, leaving only 7 of the original. Those are simple, verifiable facts of history which anyone can prove by going to an ancient history book. Now, curiously enough, Justinian did not then pack his bags and come back to take up his power in Rome. He remained safe and secure in Constantinople, or Byzantium as it was then called. And so the seat of power in Rome being left vacant, who should occupy it but the papacy, or the Pope of Rome, who rose now as an ecclesiastical leader, also assuming political power. Now, to verify that this was indeed the little horn power rising up, namely the Roman Catholic Pontiff or the papacy, let's make a comprehensive list now of all the specifications given to us by which we can identify this power. We'll go back to verse 7 in the chapter, which talks about the beast. And bear in mind, the horn that rises from the beast has the same character as the beast, and he is different from all the rest. In fact, you find this point repeated in verse 24, where it says, "And another shall arise after them, he shall be different from the first ones," in reference to the little horn power. So let's write down these specifications one by one, and then we'll check them out to see if they do in fact all point to the same power. He's different from the rest. Number 2, he arose after the 10, which of course he certainly did. Good, we'll move on a little further then to verse 25. He shall speak pompous words against the Most High. Great words, I think, in the old King James Version. So he was a blasphemer. Great words against the Most High, which of course is to blaspheme. Point number 4, he shall persecute the saints of the Most High. So he kills God's people and shall intend to change times and laws, or think to change times and laws. Point number 5. So I just put the word change here. Times and laws. T&L for times and laws. Then the saint shall be given into his hand for a time and times and half a time. So here we have now a very important time element which covers time, times and half a time. Now with 6 specifications so far, I know there's a seventh one here somewhere which I've just forgotten for the moment. Oh yes, that's right. A 7th one, which means that 3 fall before him in order to enable him to rise to a position of power and authority. Now, if a detective were called upon to identify a criminal on the basis of such clear-cut clues, could he fail to arrive at a correct conclusion? He certainly could not. And so comprehensively has this little horn power been identified in prophecy, we can't possibly come to a wrong conclusion as to the identity of this power, which in fact is but a continuation of the Babylonian system. So the same domination exercised by Nebuchadnezzar back in the early days of human history were repeated by Rome or the papacy during the so-called Dark Ages. Let's come back and check them out briefly and quickly now to find to verify that this indeed is the papal church. Now, as far as time is concerned, well, first of all, as far as character is concerned, he was different from all the rest. Now, all the rest were monarchies in which the king was the ruler The state was the dominant power in the kingdom. But in the papal system, who is the dominant power, a religious or a political leader? Religious. So he's definitely quite the opposite from what was there previously. Now he rose after the 10, which is obvious of course, because the 10 rose between 476 and 533 AD, and he rose after them in the year 538 AD. So that one's quite definitely identified. Then comes the sort of blasphemy against God. Let's turn across to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 to note the pompous claims made by the papal power as she rose to dominion during the Dark Ages. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, and nowhere in the Bible do we find a clearer or better identification of papal claims than you find in this particular scripture. It's a statement by the mighty Apostle Paul as he wrote to the Thessalonian believers in regard to developments in his own time. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, and Paul is here warning that the second coming of Christ shall not come until there's a falling away, first in verse 3. Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away comes first and the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Now, I won't take time to look up all these different references, but we're plainly told by Roman Catholic leaders themselves that the Pope is literally God upon this earth, can change divine laws, and in short, exalts himself to be God above God. Did Nebuchadnezzar express the same sentiments? He certainly did. After being told that God had given him the power to build this mighty kingdom, he took all the credit to himself by saying, "Behold, this great Babylon which I have built for the glory of my name," and so forth. So when a man upon this earth declares himself to be God in the place of God on this earth, that is blasphemy of the highest order. Now, did the papal system brutally persecute God's people down to the ages? Millions of martyrs died in various lands under her power. Let's pass changing time and laws for the moment. We'll come back to that in just a moment or two. We've already covered the 3 falling before her onslaught. Let's look now at time, times, and half a time to understand what this means. Now, of course, there's no clue given to us in Daniel chapter 7 in regards to the meaning of these words, but there is in Daniel chapter 12 a further explanation given of what this means. Daniel chapter 12. And in verse 7, in response to a question, we find these words spoken. Then I heard the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand to heaven, and swore by him who lives forever, that should be for a time, times, and half a time. Now, our first statement said time, times, and dividing of time, so now we have half a time as a further detail in regard to this. Now come to Revelation chapter 12. And in Revelation chapter 12 we have a very clear explanation given of exactly how long time, times, and dividing of time actually are. Revelation chapter 12, dealing with the flight of the church, symbolised by a woman, into the desert to escape the onslaught of the great red dragon. We have 2 verses. The first one, Revelation 12, verse 6, and the second, Revelation 12, verse 14. You'll notice how these 2 verses are absolutely parallel and help us by expressing the same truth in different words. Verse 6, then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. So, the woman fled into the desert or wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. Now, verse 14 repeats all this information, but gives a different nomination for 1,260 days. Verse 14, but the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle that she might fly into the wilderness to her place where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. It's the same woman, the same flight, the same desert, and the same time period, which in one place is called time, times, and half a time, and the other place 1,260 days. So therefore, for a period of 1,260 days, symbolically speaking, the little horn power was to reign supreme in the world of that time. Now, how long is 1260 days in prophecy? A day stands for a year, as Ezekiel chapter 4 verse 6 makes very clear, Numbers 14 verse 34. So taking 1 year to equal one day to equal 1 year, we have 1,260 years, which span, of course, from 538 to 1798. I beg your pardon, I should put this up here at this point here. And this is 1,260 years as nominated above. Now, did the papacy in fact rule unmolested for that period of time? And the answer is absolutely yes. Because she came to power in 538, that's simply a fact of history. And in the year 1798, she came to what seemed to be a total end when the Pope was taken prisoner by a French general, and the papal see was left vacant for the first time in 1,260 years. But even though it appeared that her day was done, the Bible warns that the deadly wound should be healed, and she would again come back to a position of world dominion before the final event should take place. Now we look at verse 26. But the court shall be seated, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and destroy it forever. Then the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. Now, I passed over this prophecy fairly quickly because I wish to go into Daniel chapter 8 and study it in more detail as it brings about the cleansing of the sanctuary to our view. But this is a much more detailed presentation than Daniel chapter 2. Daniel chapter 2 talked about 1, 2, 3, 4 world empires. Then, till the end of time, a strong and weak mixture of powers, culminating in the second coming of Jesus Christ. This one details the rise of the little horn power and something of the dreadful work it would do in oppressing the church of God. And God showed Daniel and us too that way back there he had the future all under control and knew exactly what would take place as the centuries rolled by, and thus guaranteed the certainty that in the end his kingdom would be established, which of course it certainly will be. Let's move on to Daniel chapter 8 now, and this one is the chapter which commands our main interest today, because in it, of course, is the wonderful verse which asks the question, verse 13, Then I heard the Holy One speaking, and another Holy One said to a certain one who was speaking, How long will the vision be? Concerning the daily and the transgression of desolation to give both the sanctuary and the host between the foot, he said to me, for 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. And these are the two verses which command our interest at the present time, because they do reveal to us what conditions must be achieved amongst God's people before the end of all things can be achieved. Let's begin now with verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after the first one that appeared to me the first time. The timing of this prophecy, or this revelation of prophecy, is quite important, because the 3rd year of Belshazzar was the very last year of Babylon's existence. In a few short weeks, or maybe months at the outside, after this vision was given, the armies of King Cyrus, the Medo-Persian, came against the walls of Babylon and overthrew our city so totally it could never, ever, and has never from that day to this risen to power again. It was destruction of the most absolute kind and of the most permanent kind. And so right there in the very eve of this city's fall, God gave to Daniel this revelation of future events. So let's just pinpoint the presentation as follows. As we know, of course, Daniel went into captivity around about 606 BC, and 70 years were prophesied to be given to Babylon's supremacy. So we have 70 literal years of time, as spoken to Jeremiah the prophet, which would end, of course, in the year 536 BC. Babylon actually fell in 538 BC, 2 years before that. 538 BC. Now this vision was given to Daniel in the third year of Belshazzar, which was just before the actual fall of Babylon. So this then is the prophecy given in Daniel chapter 8. By this time the mighty Nebuchadnezzar had died, and his grandson Belshazzar was the king of Babylon, a wicked and dissolute king who thought nothing at all of the great principles which his father had come to stand. And so this point of time becomes quite important, especially if we look at the connection between this and Daniel 9 very shortly. Verse 2, Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my visions by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. Once again, a picture, of course, of human strife, of warfare, stirring up the peoples of the earth, symbolised by the waters, in preparation for the rise of another world empire. Verse 3 and 4, I beg pardon, I'm reading chapter 7, I should be in chapter 8, my mistake. Let's go across to chapter 8 again and look at verse 2. I saw in the visions, and it so happened while I was looking, that I was in Shushan the citadel, which is in the province of Elam. And I saw in the visions I was by the river Ulai. Then I lifted up my eyes and saw, and there, standing beside the river, was a ram which had two horns, and the two horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the high one came up last. I saw the ram pushing westwards, northward and southward, so that no beast could withstand him, nor was there any that could deliver from his hand, but he did according to his will and became great. Now this prophecy opens with the symbol of a ram. Let's put him up here on the board, a ram, which of course is a male sheep, possessing two curved horns and being very belligerent and aggressive as it pushed westwards, northwards and southward, and no one could stand before the onslaught of this mighty power. And then appears a second animal upon the scene, a he-goat or a male goat. Verse 5 tells us about this. And as I was considering, suddenly a male goat came from the west across the surface of the whole earth, without touching the ground, and the goat had a remarkable horn between his eyes, one great horn. Now this he-goat or male goat came against the ram with great fury and power and destroyed him completely. Verse 7, and I saw him confronting the ram. He was moved with rage against him, attacked the ram and broke his two horns. There was no power in the ram to withstand him, but he cast him down to the ground, trampled him, and there was no one that could deliver the ram from his hand. Therefore the male goat grew very great, but when he became strong, the large horn was broken, and in place of it, four notable horns come up toward the four winds of heaven. So next of all in the prophecy was the goat, with one great horn between his eyes. Let's put here one horn. And this horn was broken very early in the piece, and four horns then arose to take the place of the first ones. And then, as in Daniel chapter 7, comes this little horn again, who rises out of one of these four horns and waxes exceeding great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the pleasant land, and becomes the great oppressor of God's people. Let's, as we close out this time period, look at the main points in regard to this little horn power, verse 9 down to verse 12. And out of one of them came a little horn which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. And it grew up to the host of heaven, and cast down some of the host and the stars to the ground, and trampled upon them. He even exalted himself as high as the prince of the host, and by him that daily was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Because of transgression, an army was given over to the horn to oppose the daily. He cast the truth down to the ground, and he did this and prospered. Just the main points now in regard to this power. He came out of one of the four horns. He waxed exceeding great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. He grew up to the host of heaven and cast down some of the host to the ground and the stars as well. He even exalted himself as high as the prince of the host and took away the daily and cast down the sanctuary. And this led to the great question, how long shall all this go on? And the answer, for 2,300 days, then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. Now, it would have been possible for the work of God to have been finished centuries before it will be if the people of God had appropriated the mighty opportunities God had made for them. If the stream of sin had been stopped in the hearts of the believers and everlasting righteousness brought in, then the end could have come long, long before. But it will come. This we are assured of by this prophecy when God said, under 2,000 days, then the sanctuary will be cleansed and the end will come to sin and or its misery. Let's pause at this point. We'll pick up our theme again later, but our time is gone for the study period now.